It was 2 days before Bonfire night, and the weather forecast for the upcoming week promised a soggy, miserable 5th of November, a total washout. And there were threats from the organizers that the public bonfire and fireworks display would be canceled due to the bad weather. But like so much of the time, decisions made by the local council, made late and last minute. Ever since the incident back in the 80s, there was always a kind of unmentioned sense of dread resonating from all the adults over 40 leading up to the 5th of November every year, which was totally lost on the children and young people in the area. Not that the kids weren't aware of the incident. Even the babies knew about the gruesome tragedy of the 5th November 1985. Usually via older siblings who, although not even born at that time, relished embellishing and exaggerating the details just to spook their younger brothers and sisters. It's all made up anyway. Nathan and Lucas only said it to freak us out. You know what they're like. Jamie looked unconvinced at her cousin as she jammed more straw in the leg of the guy. I know most of this is made up. I'm not completely stupid, you know. She grinned broadly before continuing. Daniela ain't like that though. And remember what she said about it? Jolin laughed, then considered what his little cousin had just said. Jamie was right. Although Jamie's older sister teased them, she wasn't as bad as his 2 older brothers, who were merciless in their torment of any younger relatives. Some of it doesn't even sound real, though, Joan continued laughing. I mean, who heard of a guy coming to life and hacking people up to get revenge for a kid's death? It sounds like a really bad horror film. You've got it all mixed up. As usual, it was the kid's ghost that possessed a guy because he accidentally burnt to death, Jamie explained, exasperated with her cousin. There was a boy though, and he did get trapped in the bonfire, and he did burn to death when it was lit. Nobody could hear his screams though, through all the commotion going on. Jamie paused, looking at her cousin and laughing at his face. He had turned a sickly shade of green. All right. Shut up, Jay. That's really rank. Okay. It is true, though. My dad was in the same class as the boy, Jamie said triumphantly. That day after school, Jolin went to his aunts and uncle for dinner and to put the finishing touches on the guy in preparation for the fireworks display the next day. Sitting at the dinner table, drinking tea after finishing a plate of eggs and chips, Jolin finished the mouthful of bread and butter and said, "What was the name of the boy who was burnt on the bonfire in the 80s, Uncle Frankie?" Frankie swallowed his tea and put the mug down on the table and replied in his usual soft, low, deep voice. "It ain't fit talk at the dinner table, Joel. What happened to him knocked this community for 6. Everyone around here knew his family really well. It destroyed poor parents." Frankie poured another cup of tea for himself and Terry. Jolin came to the table and sat down beside him. Martin Janus. Martin, that was his name, she said, looking slightly nervous at the sound of the name. "You were a bit of a loner, weren't he?" Jolin said, flippantly. No, not at all. On the contrary. He was your dad's, Patrick's, Owen's, and my best mate, Frankie said, waving his hand, dismissing Jolin's cross comment. We all used to knock around together. Me, Jojo, and your mom, Connie. Terry continued her husband's sentence enthusiastically, her eyes growing wide and bright, sparkling at the memory of her youth, instantly making her look 20 years younger. Were you there when it happened, the night he died? Jolin asked, cautiously this time, choosing his words and tone more carefully. Terry looked at her nephew for a few drawn-out minutes before speaking again. We were late, too late. Me, Jojo, and Marnie were always late. We were getting ready for the bonfire, and after Marnie had to pick up her little brother, her mom couldn't take him because the baby was sick. Terry looked across at her husband and said, She really moaned about it, didn't she, Frank? Yes, she was norked about it. Owen and your dad, Patrick, were at football practice. Me and Connie had to go shopping after school. We were all going to meet at the airport at 6 that evening. Martin must have gotten there earlier to put the guy in position. He was a right nerd sometimes. Frankie's words trailed off, then gave a sad, forced little laugh as he remembered their friend. He was wearing my tracky jacket that night too. He borrowed it at school because the temperature had dropped, and he didn't want to wear his blazer out of the school. It was my favorite too, the maroon one. Frankie coughed and looked away from the table, barely finding it hard to keep his composure. Terry reached over and took Frankie's hand, squeezing it gently. She took a deep breath and continued for him. The police said he must have tripped and fell soon after he placed the guy at the center top of the bonfire. He knocked himself out cold. The bonfire was too high and treacherous for anyone to climb it all alone. Those heavy bits of wood and kindling sticking out here, there, and everywhere. He should have waited for us. He should have waited for us to get there. He should have stuck to the plane. Jolin looked at his aunt and uncle with the empathy of a 30-year-old, and there was a somber yet comfortable silence. Found the remains 3 days later, but before that, there was a police search for him. We all looked for him too. It was the worst week of our lives, Terry said, breaking the silence and getting up quickly to hide the tear welling in her eyes. The morning of the 5th of November was cold and damp. The bonfire and firework display was on a knife edge of being canceled, but by the time Jolin met his older brother Lucas and their cousin Jamie outside their secondary school at 3:45, the day had dried out, if not warmed up. As they started walking home to Jolin's and Lucas's house, there was a buzz of excitement in the air. We're home, Mom. Dad? Jolin called out from the hall. Lucas ran upstairs without saying a word. I'm in the kitchen, his mom called back. Jamie went to the kitchen and embraced her aunt warmly. Connie hugged her back. Hello, you two. How was school? She was surrounded by 2 pans of beans and chili, a tray of sausages, and another of baked potatoes. On the side, there was a sticky toffee pudding and a tray of cedar toffee. It was okay, I suppose. Jolin kissed his mom on the cheek. You've been busy, Jamie said, glancing around at all the food. Yes, well, I have. So hands off till later, yeah? Connie slapped Jamie's hand playfully away from the cedar toffee. You and Joel go get changed. We need to meet the others at 5, and you need to get the guy from the shed too. I swear it's moved, Joel, Jamie said, looking perplexed and a little unnerved. Joel looked at his cousin and laughed joyfully. Don't be stupid, Jamie. It probably just fell on its side, and me and my dad sat it back up in a different place. No big deal. Jamie looked at him dubiously, then back at the guy, and back at Joel again. Okay, let's get him to the car. When they arrived at the air park, it was swarming with people. Families with excited, rosy-cheeked children, young couples huddled together in romantic embraces, and groups of kids shouting and running around boisterously. Jolin and Jamie lugged the guy to the bonfire, which would be lit exactly at 7 o'clock on the dot, and gave it to one of the organizers, then went to find Nathan and Daniela. They found the others with one of the group of rowdy kids that they all knew from school, and they spent the next hour just walking around the small food and fireworks stalls, where Jolin bought a pack of sparklers, and Nathan tried to buy some real fireworks but wasn't old enough, to the amusement of Jolin. At 10 to 7, the 4 cousins broke away from the rest of the group and made their way back to the designated meeting place where their parents told them to gather. The firework display was the same as it always was every year, and Jolin told himself that this year was the last year that he was going to go with the rest of the family. Nathan was almost 16, and he had his mates, so he didn't mind hanging around with the family. But Jolin thought that at 12, the lure of the bright light and the loud bangs, whirs, and whistles of the annual firework display were wearing thin. Joel, our guide is about to go on. Look, watch. Jolin's train of thought was broken by Jamie's excited squeals, and he was snapped back into the present as he watched their pride and joy being placed at the top center of the huge pyre, and the 3 organizers were about to light it. Suddenly, there was a heavy, strong wind that seemed to come from nowhere. It appeared to only be focused on the immediate vicinity of the bonfire, not really affecting the area beyond the bonfire. Where's Ellie? She was here a minute ago. Ellie? A woman's voice broke the expectant, uneasy silence, and people began to move back and apart, making little motions of movements rippling throughout the crowd of spectators. The attention of the crowd was now redirected away from the majestic bonfire to searching for a misplaced child. Glancing around at the adults' faces, Jolin couldn't help but notice and identify the look of sheer panic and anxiety. Suddenly, something caught his eye, just a flash of red amongst the darkness of gloom on the chilly night. He looked in the direction that he saw the glimmer of color and took a deep breath, while simultaneously grasping his cousin's shoulder to get her attention quickly. Jamie. James. It turned out he didn't need to do this, as Jamie had seen it at exactly the same time. They looked at each other. Come on, quick, Jolin whispered hoarsely, grabbing Jamie's hand. She looked at Jolin, slightly hesitant, before shrugging and following him. Jolin didn't want to be right about what he thought he had seen, and the cold, damp hand of fear was already at the bottom of his spine, slowly but surely making its way up his back, resulting in even the simplest actions like putting one foot in front of the other an almost impossible task. They ran to the back area of the air park where the organizers shared all the fireworks for the display and various other apparatus and materials. They ducked under the big notice with the words, "Keep out, staff only," in big red letters and got right to the back of the bonfire. The sounds of the crowd and the fireworks were deafening. "This feels really dodgy, Joel. I don't like it." "Neither do. Jamie, look." They both looked in the same direction at the spirit of Martin Janus. He was standing there, right in front of them, bathed in an eerie, silvery blue glow which illuminated him from head to toe. He didn't look like a ghost. He just looked like a boy around Nathan's age. He wore blue jeans and a maroon hoodie. His face and body weren't burnt or disfigured in any way. On the contrary, his features were fine, handsome, with green eyes and a head of strawberry blonde hair. He did look incredibly sad, however. He pointed at the area just beside the edge of the bonfire where the display area began. Jolin and Jamie looked at each other in bewilderment. "There's nothing there, Joel." Jamie stepped forward gingerly and cocked her ear to the cold night air. "What is it, Jane? What can you hear?" Jamie put her finger to her mouth. "Shh," she gestured to him to come nearer. "I think I heard something over there," she said, pointing in the same direction that the spirit of Martin Janus had. The two cousins ran over to the pile of lumber and firewood. It looked as though it had been disturbed recently, like it had been scattered and strewn over the ground. They both stepped over the timber and listened carefully. They could hear a very faint crying, scuffling sound coming from further back amongst the stacked kindling. Jolin and Jamie started to remove the wood away from the pile. Every now and then, Jolin looked over his shoulder to find the ghostly guide still gazing at their efforts sadly and with earnest concentration. After another 5 minutes of rummaging through the wood, a small, pudgy baby hand appeared and the crying became clearer and loud. They continued removing the timber, and soon a dirty little face became visible. Jolin threw the wood to the ground while Jamie reached in and gently pulled a cold, frightened 5-year-old girl out of the piled up firewood. It was the missing girl, Ellie Egan. "What were you doing in there, kid?" Jolin asked the infant kindly. Jamie held the small girl in her arms as Jolin wrapped his jumper around her. "I was looking for Sophie, and I got stuck in the wood. I was crying for Mommy, but the nice boy said he would get someone to help me." The small girl sobbed and wiped her nose on Jolin's jumper. "What nice boy, Ellie?" Jamie asked softly. But they couldn't get much more out of Ellie, so they gave up playing detectives and carried the missing girl back to be reunited with her mother. The hour which followed the reunion of Ellie Egan and her family was a whirlwind of emotions. Thanks and praises for the 2 young kids who found the small girl. Both Jolin and Jamie were slightly overwhelmed by the attention, and by 8:30, they had wanted to go home and chill out. On the way home in the car, Jolin's dad Patrick turned to his son and niece and asked, "How did you two know where to look for that baby?" "A friend showed us where to look," they said in unison. "Well, I reckon you and your friend saved that baby's life," Connie said proudly, beaming broadly at both Jolin and Jamie. Both the cousins looked out of the window and waved at the figure of the boy in blue jeans and maroon hoodie. He waved back, then slowly faded away.